Okay, in the last section, we really kind of focused on how the urine is formed and how the nephron functions. And in this one, we're going to talk about the hormonal control of some of these things that we've discussed in the last section. So the mammalian kidney itself is a very versatile organ, and it's under nervous and hormonal types of control. And this is how really we can regulate the amount of urine produced as well as the concentration of it. So you have antidiuretic hormone, and if you've ever heard of anybody who has maybe some heart conditions or circulatory types of problems, and they retain water, they take perhaps their doctor will prescribe for them a diuretic. And what a diuretic does is it really kind of opens up your kidneys in the sense that it helps you kind of pee off a lot of the fluids that you have in hopes of kind of bringing the swelling down, the excess water that you're retaining. And so antidiuretic hormone does just the opposite. It's going to prevent you from producing a large amount of urine. And antidiuretic hormone is the water regulating hormone. And it's going to be produced in the hypothalamus, and it's going to be stored and released by the pituitary gland. Okay? And the hypothalamus, as we said earlier, really has a kind of an osmoreceptor or a sensor on it that's going to help kind of keep us at this 300 milliosmoles per liter concentration. Okay, so that's the thing that's going to sense whether or not to release antidiuretic hormone. We discussed in the last section here the idea of kind of moving up and down and oscillating about this set point here, and draw it a little bit better than I did. Okay, make it kind of even here. You can see that if the concentration of the blood gets too high, we've got to start reabsorbing water to kind of try to bring it back down towards this set point. So when the osmolarity goes above that set point there, we're going to release this antidiuretic hormone. And what this is going to do is it's going to act on those distal tubules as well as the collecting ducts to try to assist in the reabsorption of more water. So this hormone is going to really increase the permeability of the cells that make up those tubes of the collecting duct and the proximal, or excuse me, the distal tubules. Okay, and so what you're going to do here is the water is going to be reabsorbed. The water reabsorption is going to be increased, and what we're going to do is we're going to increase the concentration of the urine by pulling more and more water out of it. Okay, so as more water starts to get absorbed now, we're going to decrease the amount of antidiuretic hormone that's going to be released. And now we're going to bring this osmolarity, back towards the set point. Now we might get too watery, and then we're going to, kind of have to reverse that. So this is an example, a good example of negative feedback. So you can kind of see what's going on. When we consume a large amount of water now, then very little LDH is going to be released. We've got a lot of water in our solution, so we don't need to reabsorb it into the bloodstream. We want to get rid of it in the urine. So the water reabsorption is going to get slowed down, and as a result of that, we're going to produce a large volume of urine. Okay, so as we go back now, one of the things just to kind of look at here is you've got these cells here that make up the collecting duct. So just give me a second here to kind of draw these types of things, and this will review some of the stuff that we've kind of talked about. So if we look at these cells as being the things that are forming the collecting duct, okay, and then you can say just doesn't really matter. We can say that there's a blood vessel right here and so forth that's kind of closely associated with this sort of a thing. And then this here, this would be the collecting duct. So this is the collecting duct right here, okay? And this is going to move, out into the ureter. Oops. And then to the bladder. And when we release the ADH, okay, so if we go back for a second, and we release the ADH here, this is going to act on these distal tubules, like we said, as well as the collecting ducts, and increase the permeability of those cells of the tubes. Okay, so if we look here now, this antidiuretic hormone is going to kind of diffuse into the cell. The antidiuretic hormone is going to act really on the genes. It's going to work kind of with these transcription factors, and it's going to turn on the genes that make the proteins that form the collecting ducts in these cells. Okay, so if we look at this in this sense here, okay, what we can do is kind of poke these little holes in these cells here. Okay, so I'll go back and get my pencil. And now what we've done is we've got all of these little ducts right here that are going to allow this water to get taken back up into these cells and then diffuse through other water channels on the other side and back into the blood. And that's how we're going to work to reabsorb the water, because we're thirsty, and that's why we're releasing the ADH. The blood concentration is too high, and then that's going to reduce the volume of the urine and make very concentrated urine, because we're reabsorbing this water into these collecting duct cells, because the antidiuretic hormone has turned on the genes in all of these cells to make the proteins, which are the channels, the aquaporins, for instance. It's allowing the water through, and then it's going to pass through to the other side and be reabsorbed and kind of take us from a really concentrated blood back down to something more manageable towards that set point. Okay, and then the opposite is going to occur when the body has a lot of fluids in it. Very little ADH will be here. And then what we'll do is we'll start to close off these water channels, these aquaporins. We're going to stop making them. We're going to break them down. And now excess water is going to get out, and we'll produce a dilute urine, because very little is being reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. Okay, so that's the way your body's going to kind of go about regulating the amount of water that gets either reabsorbed into the system or excreted in the urine. Okay, the other thing that we have is known as the RAS system, the RAAS. So this would be the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. And this is a second type of regulatory mechanism. And what this involves is what's known as the JGA, or the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay, and what this does, and you can see here's juxtaglomerular apparatus. What this does is this is going to kind of help by releasing an enzyme into the circulation that's going to have really kind of a constrictive effect on the different types of arterioles, which are going to supply blood to the glomerulus, and it's going to sense drops in blood pressure and low body fluids, that sort of a thing. Okay, so when the blood pressure gets low and it decreases, for instance, if you've lost fluids, you get up too fast, this type of a thing, the kidney is going to very quickly release some renin from the juxtaglomerular apparatus, and it's going to initiate a chemical reaction. And if you remember, like fibrinogen and pepsinogen and anything with a gen on it, okay, it's going to give rise to something. So you've always got angiotensinogen flying around in your blood with a variety of other things as well. And what happens is when the renin gets released, that's going to convert the angiotensinogen into angiotensin 2, okay? And this angiotensin 2 is moving around the blood now, and what it's going to do is it's going to help to increase the blood pressure by constricting the arterioles. And the arterioles, those are the little kind of, regions of the capillaries. They've got these little sphincters around them. These things are all going to kind of constrict, and by decreasing the size of the tube, you're increasing the pressure. So in response to the blood pressure drop, you want that pressure to get up fast, so this renin's going to get released, convert the angiotensinogen into angiotensin 2, which is going to constrict the arterioles, and it's going to drive up the blood pressure. Okay, it's going to decrease the blood flow. And if you just think about, the capillaries that supply your kidneys, you've got over 1 million of these nephrons in your kidneys, in these juxtaglomerular apparatus. When these things all kick in, you can very rapidly change your blood pressure. So your kidneys are very highly involved in regulating the blood pressure in your body. Okay. The other thing that the angiotensin kind of reaction does is this angiotensin 2 also is going to stimulate those proximal tubule cells to reabsorb more water and more sodium chloride, like we said kind of in the last thing. They're not normally permeable to salt, but the angiotensin 2 is going to help increase the water and increase the salt. In other words, if your blood pressure drops and you constrict the size of the tube, you're going to elevate the pressure. And if you reabsorb more water, so you put more fluid into these constricted tubes, that's going to increase the pressure further. Okay, so this is going to decrease the amount of water and salt in the urine and increase the blood volume, which is going to have that effect of increasing the blood pressure as well. Okay, so those two things are going to work together. And then that angiotensin 2 is also going to stimulate the adrenal glands, those glands that sit right on top of the kidneys, to release some aldosterone. Okay, and the aldosterone is going to act on those distal tubules, causing them to reabsorb more sodium and more water and increase that blood pressure and the blood volume and so forth. So that's how your kidneys really work to deal with the blood pressure issue that you may have from getting up too quickly or whatever the case may be, because it's going to really act, what it wants to do is act to keep that blood pressure high so that you don't pass out, those sorts of things. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the kidney. Those are the types of things you need to know. Any questions that you have, make sure that you write them all down, and then we'll go through a small part of this in class, and then we'll move on. Okay, so as always, got questions, get them down. We'll address them in class, and we'll talk to you soon.